Look at the
This
contrast.
Nice.
Like you've got like a neon green and then kind of like a Bermuda grass green, and I've got like Augusta fairway green.
Yeah, we'll get into more of this later, Dan. We'll hash this out. I think we're supposed to talk football right now. So I guess we'll go back to Russell Wilson, who, as we mentioned, there is still a little bit of drama here. Russell Wilson has a preferred list of 4 teams he would like to be traded to if he is in fact traded, but he has not demanded a trade. That according to Adam Schefter. His agent spoke to Schefter on the record about those 4 teams, which would include the Cowboys, Saints, Raiders, and Bears. Now, he might have a better chance, Wilson, of being traded next offseason, given the money involved. If Seattle dealt him in the coming months, they would face a dead money charge of $39 million, as this is the largest year he is due. The last year he is due guaranteed money. Another tricky issue, it wouldn't make financial sense to deal him until after June 1st, which of course is after the NFL draft. So just a hunch, if they're going to trade Russell Wilson, they'd be looking for some picks. Anyways, we know the money involved. Let's talk about the specifics. Dan Orlovsky has changed, but let's talk to Dan Graziano. Dan Graziano, what should we make of the latest out of this news in Seattle?
Dan just has another jacket ready to go in case he wears the same color as somebody else. I don't understand how this works.
He's a fancy man.
I am impressed. But, yeah, Field, I was starting to say before you and your fellow Masters champion got into it there, I think that this is somewhere between, it's not like a everything is hunky-dory Tom Brady in Tampa Bay situation, but it's not even close to a Deshaun Watson in Houston situation. Russell Wilson and the Seahawks still have a relationship. They've been in contact this offseason. Yeah. They've been able to tell each other what they do and don't like. And I think this is a situation worth watching because if there's a list of potential trade destinations, it just makes sense that you can't rule things out. But I don't get the sense that the Seattle Seahawks are making plans that involve having to find a new quarterback. And I don't get the sense that the Seattle Seahawks are particularly worried about Russell Wilson forcing his way out of there, at least not this offseason.
All right, Mina can take a deep breath now. But when you look at the 4 teams that were mentioned, that were listed by Russell Wilson, Mina, do any of them actually make sense?
No, I understand why it might seem to Wilson like the grass, or shall we say the jacket, is greener on the other side. When you actually look at these teams relative to Seattle, I don't see the upgrade, especially if his concern, as we've been told, is getting back to a Super Bowl and winning and being protected. I mean, you can go through them all. Chicago, yes, better defense, not a better offensive line, lack of weapons. The Raiders, there you've got a better offensive line, some skill players, but a defense that isn't certainly not going to get you past the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. Moving on to the Cowboys, well, I mean, they're just a mess. We saw what happened when they lost Dak Prescott, even though they've got some skill players there. That defense is a tire fire. The only team that I think, as currently constituted, is competitive or even better than Seattle is New Orleans, but from a cap perspective, that's insane. And beyond all of that, none of those teams that I just mentioned have the sort of draft picks it would take for Seattle to be incentivized to even do a deal. I just don't see this being realistic, especially as Dan laid out this offseason in particular.
Yeah, this is either about Pete Carroll or it's about brand and legacy. It's two-sided. Listen, in the past couple of weeks, Russell Wilson has essentially thrown the offensive line under the bus. He's talked about the personnel on the football team not being good enough. Now there's 4 teams that he would go to, and then we find out that there's a conversation between him and Pete Carroll that ends poorly. So if this is about him and Pete Carroll and Russell being tired of playing for a defensive-minded head coach or, trying to find all the different reasons why he's unhappy in Seattle, when Seattle's got to choose Russell Wilson, they would have to move on from Pete Carroll as their head coach, fire Pete Carroll and go, okay, Russell, what do you want? If that's the issue here at the end of the day, then how do we keep Russell and how do we help build ourselves into a Super Bowl contender again? But if this is about brand and legacy in the long term, 10+ years from Russell Wilson and even trying to become the NFL's first version of like Magic Johnson, it's a done deal. His mind is already made up. 1 more year in Seattle would not change that. So if that's the case, if this is the situation where it's brand and legacy, the Seattle Seahawks need to realize, okay, his mind is made up. There's nothing we could do, and try to get as much as you can for a very important player.
But if it's about football, Dan, I think Seattle has options or things they can do to accommodate some of Wilson's demands, specifically improving the offensive line, which is the only thing that he's been explicit about in terms of the change he wants. You don't have a ton of money, but invest it in the interior of that line. Corey Linsley from Green Bay is a free agent. That's someone where if they went out and signed him and they have not invested a lot of money in free agents on the line, that would send a message. Okay, we hear you, Russell, and we're going to protect you better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's sort of what he's looking for. And I think if this offseason goes well and the season goes well, then we're talking about something that we a year from now, hey, remember when we were talking about Russell Wilson getting traded? Wasn't that ridiculous? I think that's a potential outcome here and maybe even a likely one. But yeah, Seattle very much focused on what they can build around him.
It's been 143 straight games that Russell Wilson has started for the Seattle Seahawks now that Phillip Rivers has retired, the longest active amongst all quarterbacks in the NFL. Also leading all passers with 11 yards per attempt. So, Graziano, we'll start with you. How set are the Panthers on finding a new quarterback this offseason?
Very set, Field. They're as married to Teddy Bridgewater as Dan Orlovsky was to the green jacket he had on at the beginning of the show. They are looking to upgrade, and they believe that they can. They tried to get Matthew Stafford. They were involved in those talks, didn't get him. Bridgewater was in the offer. And, yeah, they didn't play on Carson Wentz, but they would certainly love for Houston to take their call on Deshaun Watson. Obviously, if that doesn't happen before the draft, they have to look at other options. And I absolutely believe that they, in that event, would be in play to take a quarterback at 8 or even potentially try and move up to get a guy they really like. We've heard a lot of talk about the Carolina Panthers, who coached at the Senior Bowl, and Mac Jones, who was a star that week, and connecting those two. My skeptics' antenna is up, as it often is in draft season. The more you hear that, the more you wonder if it's actually the case. But they are definitely on the hunt for a quarterback for the short and long term.
All right, so Dan Orlovsky, let's take a closer look at Mac Jones specifically. He is not in the mold of other recent quarterbacks that were drafted high, and mobility is not a major part of his game. Can he succeed at the NFL level?
Yes. So then the next question is how? Okay, first of all, he needs to be phenomenal from the neck up. You know, his pre-snap thought process and his study habits have to be fantastic. His understanding of the play call and what's the goal of the play call in the defense. Then his post-snap thought process has got to be outstanding as well. His anticipation of where throws have got to be in the windows that they're going to be in has got to be elite. His ball placement has to be elite. His pocket movement, the subtlety within his pocket movement, the hitches, the timing of and the rhythm of their offense has to be elite. His preparation has got to be the best in the NFL. Like, it's got to be just, these things have to be off the charts. So if he's got all of those attributes and traits that are absolutely off the charts, then yeah, he could be successful because it would mitigate the need for the athleticism that we look at for so many quarterbacks or look at in so many quarterbacks nowadays. So it's harder to be really, really good as a young quarterback in the NFL that way now. But as long as he's got those traits that are just off the charts, he's got a chance to be successful.
Dan, I agree with you, and I think it's important what you just said. It is harder if you aren't mobile. I mean, there hasn't been a non-mobile successful quarterback drafted in at least 6 years. And if you're at home saying Burrow, Herbert, Tua, they're all mobile, guys. And if you're saying Tom Brady just won a Super Bowl, sure, go draft Tom Brady. Go find him. Easy. No problem. With Mac, I think it's really interesting because it used to be the case with quarterback prospects, if you were a dual threat quarterback, situation was everything. You had to land with a team and a coach that was willing to adjust their scheme to you. Now, the reverse is true. For pocket passers, and strictly pocket passers who are not that mobile, context matters more than it does for mobile quarterbacks. And I think that's 100% the case with Mac Jones because he is accurate, he is smart, but his lack of mobility means every team is not right for him. I think Carolina, for example, is not a good destination. That is a rebuilding team with a bad offensive line, bottom 10 in the NFL last year. To me, that's not a good place for Mac Jones to land.
All right, so put Orlovsky on the spot then, Mina. If the Panthers are a bad spot for him to land, Orlovsky, where's a good team for him to land at the NFL level?
Yeah. San Francisco 49ers. Think about what Mac Jones just did in Alabama, right? At Alabama. He did it under Steve Sarkisian, their play caller. Or Steve Sarkisian was in the NFL with the Atlanta Falcons right after Kyle Shanahan was there. So they majored in that play-action passing game. That's a perfect, ideal fit for both the player and the team. Kyle Shanahan doesn't need athletic quarterbacks. He doesn't need these runners. He actually prefers those guys that utilize that bootleg a little bit more, that play-action game just a little bit more because it's such a big fundamental part of their offense. So I think, to be honest, it's a home run for both, again, the football team, scheme-wise, and the player. Because to Mina's point, she's spot on about this, that it needs to be an ideal fit coaching philosophy-wise. And the last thing I'll say, because Breeze and Brady are the two people that people point to and go, well, they're not athletic. They're also maniacally obsessed with their craft. So if you've got that trait, then good, find it, and hopefully Mac Jones does.
Yeah, Dan, when you ask Kyle Shanahan what he looks for in a quarterback,